Good afternoon, and welcome to the CyLab seminar series. And this is a business risk forum event where I ask, over the years, I've asked friends and colleagues from the operational side of security and privacy and intelligence in the corporate sector or government sector, and in our speaker today, and some of both, to come and talk with us, share their perspectives from, again, the operational side of things. And today's speaker is Keith Rhodes, who's been a friend and colleague of mine for about 20 years now. And the title of his talk is Virtual Realpolitik and Cyber Detente. Keith's been in security intelligence for about 30 years, and he is currently Chief Technology Officer for QinetiQ North America. We first met in 1995 at about 5 in the morning in the Senate, or Russell office building of the United States Senate, where Jim Christie of the Air Force and him were waiting for me, and we were to go on to the Nunn hearings on cybersecurity, security in cyberspace, which was a very important set of hearings early on. And the panel that day was Gene Spafford and Richard Pethia from upstairs, from CERT, and myself. So Keith was at that time working as in the General Accounting Office of the U.S. government, where they did some tremendous studies on what was and wasn't happening, and puncturing a lot of the false memes about security, what it is and what it isn't. So I'm really happy that Keith's here today. Again, the title of the talk is Virtual Realpolitik and Cyber Detente. You know the drill. If you want to ask a question, make sure you press the black button so everybody can hear. And let's welcome our speaker.
And I hope you applaud at the end as well. So, what I want to talk to you about, part of my career was in strategic arms limitation talks. So I worked at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I was in at one of the thermonuclear weapons design labs. And so part of what I want to convey today is some of that history and how we achieved detente with thermonuclear opponents by using a foundation of Realpolitik. Realpolitik being a clear-eyed view of what you need to do and what the world situation is. I think that is one of the reasons that we continue to produce, my view, and I preface all this by, at this point, I am not representing my company or anything. It is a researcher's view. That researcher, c'est moi. It is not anyone else. These are my opinions. I mean, if they're good, my company will probably take credit for it, but if they're bad, they're all mine. What I want to say is that there are some foundational things about strategic arms limitation talks that we all as researchers have to understand in the research that we are doing in order for strategy and policy to change such that we don't continue the, again, my view, the current series of I will fix that hole, as opposed to let us try and fix the whole thing. You know, let's stop thinking about HOLE and start thinking about WHOLE. And part of that also includes understanding adversaries, understanding behavior, understanding what impact is. And that's really one of the things I'm going to focus on a lot in this talk. So, Sherman, let's set the Wayback Machine to a time when everybody was really, really terrified. Many people consider it to be the good old, bad old days where we were standing with thermonuclear guns to each other's heads. But as some people have focused, they said, God, I really loved the clarity. I miss the clarity of us all sitting there with thermonuclear weapons to our heads. Because now it is extremely fragmented and far more complex, especially when we talk about things in terms of quote-unquote cyber, which means just about anything to anybody, and quote-unquote virtual, which means just about anything to anybody. So, who is this masked man? This man is Henry Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, who was Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, and he made détente and Realpolitik part of foreign policy of this nation under President Nixon and under President Ford. Now, the interesting thing about this is he was very clear. He had a lot of clarity on it. It was very clear that Realpolitik was, in a lot of ways, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Because as a function of Realpolitik, we made friends with some people who had really, really bad human rights records. But they were the enemy of my enemy and had strategic value against my enemy's strategic partner. So this is a function of satellite nations and sphere of influence and all the rest of that. One point I will make about Dr. Kissinger is he has always been an unreconstructed Cold Warrior. He has always thought about it as Cold War politics. Even today, he still understands that it's not we, they, it's the world shifts according to shared interests. There are no allies, there are only shared interests. And there are shared risks, and there are shared threats. And that makes for strange bedfellows. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. So what takes a Cold Warrior and makes him the one who is able to get Richard Nixon, the arch Cold Warrior, to go to Moscow and meet with Brezhnev and go to Beijing and meet with Mao? What changes? Well, prior to Kissinger, this is a man, John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State. He believed in brinksmanship. Brinksmanship is getting right to the brink. You're right to the edge, and you wait for your opponent to blink, and you've got mutually assured destruction. It's like you break it, you bought it. You pull it, you're going to wear it. This is how it goes. You push right to the edge. Well, that gets kind of scary, right? How many times can you move up? I mean, as I was talking to Richard earlier, I say, you know, brinksmanship is really great, except when somebody goes for a coffee while you're trying to have that move to the brink. And then somebody's not in the room, and next thing you know, everybody goes up in a flash. And then there was Herman Kahn. Herman Kahn was a thinker. He formed the Hudson Institute. He worked at the Rand Corporation. But he thought about the unthinkable. He had two main points he made. One, thermonuclear war is inevitable. And during his time, nobody ever disagreed with him on that one. They said, sure, it's coming. But he also said it was winnable. Obviously, thermonuclear exchange being a winnable proposition was a very controversial idea. So, even though a lot of people debate the points that he made, I would argue that the fact that he threw on the table this totally unthinkable thought of, you know, at the end of a thermonuclear exchange, you may still have 30 million survivors. That means you have a viable nation. Now people have to come up and say, wait, no, everybody's dead at the end of it. And he says, no, everybody's not dead at the end of it. And now what do you do? And that scared a lot of people more than the idea of mutually assured destruction, because they looked at it and they said, oh man, you mean we might be around after this thing? That brinksmanship stuff may not actually work? So this is one of the bases for this. He had a great observation he made. He says, well, and he was talking about the negotiations between the U.S. and Chinese relative to nuclear weapons limitations. He says, well, you know, we argue with the Chinese, but we don't argue that loudly because we have too much to lose. And so even Herman Kahn, who talked about inevitable and winnable, understood that there was too much to lose. This man is Harold Agnew. Harold Agnew was the third director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, and as he states, that is my legacy. Point is that most of the U.S. nuclear arsenal was developed under his tutelage. He was inside the plane that dropped the first weapon on Hiroshima. He was also at the very last underground test of a nuclear weapon. So here is an individual, he just died recently, but here's an individual, an unapologetic hawk, and yet he became one of the key people associated with strategic thermonuclear arms limitation talks. How does that happen? How do people change their mind? Well, this for a starter, this is the Castle Bravo test. It was done in 1954. As you can see, 6:45 in the morning in Bikini Atoll time, March 1st. The estimated yield of this weapon was 5 megatons. The actual yield was 15 megatons. Why? One extra neutron. I don't know how many of you know anything about physics or lithium deuteride, but you know, lithium-6 was the fuel, lithium-7 was also in there. When you do it under great compression, you get that extra neutron that shoots out of the 7. All of a sudden it becomes fuel. A neutron is 14 MeV. I don't know if that means anything to you, but this weapon generated petajoules of energy. Petajoules of energy. Its fireball at 1 second after detonation was 5 miles across. The men who worked in the control block had to take sheets off the bed, cut eye holes in it, and run out to the helicopter to be evacuated off of the island in order for them to not be completely covered in radioactive coral. That was a mistake. That was an error in physics, all right? The designers said, it'll work, and it really worked. Harold Agnew later commented, he says, yeah, we should have known that. We should have known that. We knew the physics. We should have known that. One neutron in the material gives you this. This is Andrei Sakharov. Andrei Sakharov, designer of the Soviet third idea. The third idea was Soviet thermonuclear weapons design. It was a variation on the Teller-Ulam or Ulam-Teller design, depending on which one of those scientists you like better. He coined the phrase, the balance of nuclear terror. He went from being the designer and proponent of the third idea to being a dissident. As a matter of fact, being a dissident who was under arrest. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He fought for human rights. He fought for disarmament. He designed this weapon. It's called the Tsar Bomba, the king bomb, right? It is the largest thermonuclear weapon ever designed. Its potential yield is 100 megatons. The test yield at this shot was 50 megatons. That's 225 petajoules of energy. Fireball on this, at detonation plus 1 second, was almost 9 miles across. The shock wave was so powerful, the fireball couldn't touch the earth. Shock wave threw it up. blast wave hit the Earth and blew that fireball back up into the sky. Now, this is what changed Sakharov's mind. Because the Soviet hierarchy wanted to do the original 100 megaton design. That's what they wanted to do. He said, no, 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 let's wrap it in a different material so the fallout's not bad. So they still get 50 megatons out of it. All right? This, I don't know about the rest of you, but this is the nuclear umbrella. Well, Richard and I grew up under this nuclear umbrella, right? And once upon a time, we got to see little films, and the films would show a turtle, and the turtle would run out into a field, and it's all about called duck and cover. And it would show the little turtle pull his head and his little arms in, and he had this little green helmet on, and he'd go like this and lay in a ditch. I don't know about you, but if there's a 50 megaton device that goes off above me and the shock wave is so powerful the fireball can't hit the earth, I don't think lying in the ditch with my arms in is going to cut it. Or some of the tests, some of the preps that we did, climb under your desk at school. All right, big fireball coming, let me climb under a wooden desk. Good call. So at some point, what happened? Well, who's this man? We're actually celebrating the 50th anniversary of his assassination. John F. Kennedy, where is he? American University? What's he doing? He is standing as the 35th U.S. president, declaring a unilateral suspension of all U.S. atmospheric nuclear testing. Lots of people claim this is his most important speech. So he came into office. He believed in strategic nuclear weapons. What happened? What changes people's minds? So how do we move from the Jornada del Muerto, where the Trinity shot was done in 1945, to American University without killing ourselves? How did we do this? We did it through a thing called nuclear surety. So we understood the weapons effects, big fireballs. You may have seen some of the video that shows a school bus at a test site being lit up, ignited, and then blown over. We did tests out in the desert that were against buildings and school buses and cars and trucks and towers and all kinds of things to see what the effects were. And so we looked at it and said, wow, that's a pretty effective weapon. But we also had delivery systems, also had command and control systems. We also had readiness. Readiness boils down to two people sitting in a silo wearing red suits, having guns on their hips. Each one of them has a key, and they're both willing to put the key in and turn the key at the same time to send an intercontinental ballistic missile with a 20 or 40 megaton warhead on it against an enemy. Kind of scary. We also had a policy. Policy was, yup, we'll use these things. We had a strategy. The strategy was, this is how we're going to use this thing. And we had a definition of a threat. But most importantly, we realized we had something to lose. If all of this worked, and we were really sure it was going to work, we had something to lose. So you say, okay. So what does that have to do with this virtual and cyber and all the rest of that stuff? Okay, who is this happy man? This is Peter Neumann. Peter Neumann is a principal scientist out at SRI. Peter Neumann also testified when Richard and I did. Peter's great quote is, "The infrastructure stinks." He said that in congressional testimony. He was asked a direct question. He says, well, you have to realize, Senator, the infrastructure stinks. All right, that's almost 20 years ago now, right? So the infrastructure stinks. Not much surety in that, is there? Not much good out of that. Why do you think that is? It's because we don't know how to build code? We know how to build robust code. Peter Neumann worked on the Multics operating system. Multics operating system is older than most of us in this room. As a matter of fact, there's only a couple of us old enough to say, yeah, I'm actually older than the Multics operating system. But it was people like Peter and Don Parker and folks like that, Dave Clark, and those kinds of people who were in there saying, well, you know, we should really have a very, very small kernel in this operating system, and it should do only a few things, and it should do them really well, and it shouldn't do other things. And they were talking about surety inside a system, inside an operating system. And, oh, by the way, we should actually care about what the compiler is doing. And we should figure out where we want to get the system clock and things like that so that we can understand how it's going to network and balance. And we'll have access control lists. Access control lists. Those kinds of things. I mean, foundational things that are still done today, but they were doing it back in the 1960s. Why is that? And it's not just Peter. Peter's a great guy. Love him to death. But, you know, you can ask all the fellows of the ACM, the IEEE, anybody who's ever used a compiler, anybody who's ever administered a network or a computational system, anyone who's loaded commercially available hardware or software, and they'll come back and say, by God, the infrastructure stinks. It does. You know, the compilers are bad. You've got a lot of commercial systems that have dead code in them. Okay, fine. I understand all our genetic material. Our genetic material has a bunch of bad, dead code in it. But we've evolved over time so that we can keep just plugging along. You know, every once in a while we get some kind of genetic anomaly. But this is pretty consistent. You have to go out of your way. And usually you have to go find some obscure operating system to find a kernel that, one, is small, two, doesn't do much other than what it's supposed to, right? I mean, I'm not an operating system bigot, but I am a kernel bigot, all right? It should be small, it should be simple, it shouldn't be crazy. It shouldn't be running the user interface. So what does that lead us to in the modern day? On the left, we have Robert Tappan Morris. 25 years ago, he ruined my day. All right? 25 years ago, he unleashed the Morris worm. And I got to work for 4 days in a row. That trying to figure out what the heck was going on with the network called Barnet at the time, right? It was the Bay Area network. It was Barnet and the ARPANET, and I was at Livermore, and we were all trying to figure things out. And we were basically on the phone to each other saying, I do not know what's going on, but buddy, it's coming your way. Click, got to go. All right? So what did he get? He got probation. All right? At that point in time, there were many of us who thought, well, this guy just plugged the ARPANET for 4 or 5 days, right? Yeah, we got it back up again. Life is good, and we move on. But for those God bless you, for those 4 or 5 days, it was not fun. All right? He got probation. He ended up founding a company. Ended up making a lot of money. The American dream. This is Jeremy Hammond. Jeremy Hammond is a hacktivist, part of Anonymous, stole some information. He was just sentenced to 10 years in prison. Wow. One guy brings down the entire known network of the universe. One guy steals some information. Probation? A decade. I am not arguing whether those sentences are correct or not. I'm trying to understand why they're so different. What is different about them? Risk vagary is what is different. Risk is the problem we have, my view, as researchers in trying to get anyone to take us seriously. Yes, we research. Yes, I will secure your mobile communications. Yes, I will do this. Yes, I will do this. Yes, we can do this. We can write better code. We can build better compilers. We can design better chips. We can set up foundries. We can have an entire supply chain of code from the hardware base up through layer 7. We can do that. If we can convince people that there's risk. Threat, vulnerability, impact equals risk. Threat's your opponent with both intent and capability. It can't just be, I really want to hurt you, and I have no way of doing it. That's kind of a threat, but it's not one that you need to take seriously. Or somebody's got all the capability in the known universe, but they really don't want to come after you. Okay, you still want to keep an eye on them because they got a lot of capability. But if they're not after you, then you really have a tough time selling your threat. Vulnerability, opportunity for a system breach. I go back to Peter, the smiling man in the pool. The infrastructure stinks. The infrastructure we ride at this moment is nothing but an opportunity for a system breach. Nothing but. So, impact, value of the asset, right? The asset compromised, loss, money, otherwise, blah, 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 of a compromised asset. This is the struggle we face as researchers. We come, we say, well, here's this problem, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You are now explaining it to someone who does not even patch their existing systems. How do we make that argument? How do we get the point across? We have to step out of our pure research standpoint and say, there is a value to this information that I can capture. This is what I can do with it. Rene Magritte's painting, right? This is not a pipe. Some people think garbage, some people think riches. How much would you spend to protect it? If it was yours and I told you it was worth $1 million, what would you do to protect it? Even if you didn't think it was cool. You look at it and you say, come on, it's a cartoon of a pipe. Some clever surrealist, right? But I look at it and I say, well, you go on that PBS auction show, right, where they sit there and they talk about the things people have in their garage, and they say, well, at auction this would bring $50,000. Well, at auction this would bring $1 million. Whoa, that's pretty good. I guess I shouldn't be putting my feet on that coffee table, right? So this is the struggle. Some people are going to look at it and say, it has great value. Some people are going to look at it and say, it's a stupid picture. Does this have value? And I realize it's not money because it's a picture of money. But if I laid this pile of cash in front of you right now, would you say it has value, or would you say, no, that is the root of all evil and I will stay away from it. Keep your filthy blood money. No, you'd pick it up, head for the door, and figure out how to protect it. Because most people, most who have it, protect it nonetheless. It could be a terrible thing, but guess what? It translates into beans and bread and gas for your car and a house payment and all kinds of other things that go along with it. So here's a valuation. $100 worth $100. $100 also has meaning. $100 also has, gee, I can heat my house. That's why the financial sector, though not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, when I have conversations with financial analysts about the security of their systems, this is the only question they ask me. Am I hemorrhaging dollars? Am I hemorrhaging dollars? Show me how somebody can steal money from me. Fine. Did I show them how somebody can steal money from them? And they say, fine, we'll fix it. I have no stock in MakerBot. I am not trying to sell their product. They have nothing to do with me. I like this machine. Now, to some, this machine represents extreme value as a disruptive technology that is going to do to the manufacturing computational environment as much, if not more, depending on who you're talking to, as internetworking. To some others, it's all about the scary hype, right? I show people this thing and they say, oh, you can make a gun. No. What I can do is rapidly prototype a case for a sensor to make a smart building. Yeah, but you can make a gun. These are the things that we struggle with in trying to get across to people the value of the technology, what we can do with it. Yes, there are logical extremes to everything. But trying to get people to understand, bridging the gap between, oh, you know, there's a virus on the ISS, you know, the International Space Station. Well, yeah, there have been several of them. And it still continues to orbit, and nobody's died so far. So, yeah, you have to protect it. And one of the reasons that the kernel is set up the way it is to try and make certain that it doesn't have those kinds of susceptibilities. Does this have value? Right? All the social networking stuff. Does it have value? Some people, they cannot live without it. There are others who are desperately trying to live away from it. But none of them offer any protection. As a matter of fact, some of them shift their protection model on an hourly basis in order to make certain they can collect your information better. And yet, it's free, and it feeds the general narcissism that is in all humanoid life forms. And therefore, people post their entire lives to this thing all the while complaining about the NSA is, you know, looking into my inner parts and checking out my life, listening on my phone calls, which of course I post to my Facebook page. This is the thing that we're trying to battle against as researchers. But ultimately it's, does this have value? Ones and zeros, right? Does it have value? The answer is yes, it has value, but it depends on how we explain, how we as researchers explain the practical application of our research. And I don't want that research to end. I do not want to recommend to any of you that the research ends. I think one of the things that we need to do as a research community is push our, I don't know, what do we call them? Customers, whatever they are, the people we're trying to help. I mean, we're not the greatest altruists in the world. Sure, you want to do your startup company and sell it in a few years for $100 million. Fine, I have no problem with that. But if we can change the terminology or the way we talk about our research to move towards surety, talking about, just as we did in the nuclear environment, talking about it in terms of the computational environment. It's not, oh, it's a highly available system, or it's a highly reliable system, or it's a highly survivable system, or a highly secure system. Make it all four. Then you have surety. And it's not, we're not going to be able to fix everything. We're not going to have perfect security. But if we push our research against reality, which is a dirty environment, our The people we are trying to help and inform are already penetrated. I would argue, based on what I have seen in my career, everybody is hit. Not has been hit, is hit. Something is crawling. Something is creepy. Something is walking through the network, trying to walk through the network. And the problem is we can't tell very well. In some cases we can, but we can't tell very well the difference between a network anomaly, because our software is garbage, and an actual attack. As a matter of fact, I read an article the other day, something like the top indicators of a system breach. It was all the usual stuff, right? You know, system slows down, changes in user privilege, updates that you didn't plan on, unscheduled updates, you know, loads on the network at odd times, files written to different areas, changes in the database structure, all these things that we all know. And here we are, 20 years later, standing there telling people, okay, these are, you know, the indicators we've had for the last 20 years, they're still there. So we have to keep telling them that, because their environment is dirty. Yes, you calibrate to the lab, but we got to move it more and more into the under attack environment. Not just so we can prove that it works, but so that we can prove that it works despite human nature or against human nature. Because any system that doesn't take into account human nature is going to fail, because people do silly things. I mean, when I was in the government, I was a system tester. I would go in, I would cut a deal. We would actually have a written out script of what we were going to do. I always promised them I would never do social engineering. That was always the first thing I did, because that piece of paper was a lie. That only told them what to watch for so I could go do something else. Because I was trying to be a real adversary. That's what we need to do. Human nature. Right? And toward this valuation, right? Help, draw out, ask, what are you trying to protect and why? Because you can't protect everything. So what's really important? What is really important? When I deal with a financial institution, the really important is the ones and zeros that equal $1. Everything else is kind of, you know, I'll worry about it later. In some organizations, the most important thing are the ones and zeros that add up to your identity. In some organizations, the ones and zeros add up to intellectual property. In some organizations, it's all of the above. We as researchers have to ask people that, and I promise you that one of the things I found is that when I have that conversation, oddly enough, the amount of research dollars I get increases. Because now they see practical value as opposed to an isolated technical discussion, which may be completely fascinating to us in this room. But somebody out there has got the dollars that we want. That research grant that's sitting out there, we have to make certain that at the end, yes, we have something we've delivered, yes. That we did it on time, yes. That it worked, yes. That we publish, yes. But we really want to set the hook. We've got to make certain that the one who is receiving the benefit understands how to apply it. And to that end, I would argue that we need sort of two papers, right? One is the no BS tech paper, right? The one that we always write, always has the math, always has the code, always talks about what algorithm we used, always talks about in excruciating detail the really, really interesting problem to us. But then there's another part. We've got to have a strategic aspect to it. Something that, I mean, I talk to people who are in technology policy programs around the country. It's nice. It's good. They're usually policy heavy and technology light. We've got to help them get more technology heavy, because they're making policy decisions and making strategic decisions and tactical decisions without understanding that, you know, your mobile device, I don't care what you have, is consumer electronics. You're walking around with a talking toaster. It's fun for the most people out there. Most of the people buy it for entertainment. Well, just because you know how to use it doesn't mean you know how the stack works. Just because you know how to use it doesn't mean you know what that kernel is doing. That's our job. That's our job to help them understand what they have in their hand and what it means to them and what its impact is and what its value is when they put a quote-unquote wallet on it. Because then it really starts to have personal valuation. And I don't think, at least my perspective, I don't think we're doing a really good job of explaining to people that there is a risk equation. And it's a lot of fun when it's, you know, basically a game console and you get to talk on it and things like that. But when you start to put your personal information on it, when it becomes the holder of your identity, the holder of your money, I think we have a way in to explain to them the risk associated with it. So this is the foundation for us to be able to talk about who do we partner with? Who don't we partner with? And listen, I don't care where you're from. I don't care what country you're going back to. It doesn't matter. All governments on the planet need to understand this, because all governments on the planet are sitting on stinky infrastructure. I go back to Peter sitting in the pool with a big smile on his face, right? You know, he's happy to be in the pool. It's sunny. It's California, right? Everybody's infrastructure is bad. Now, some of them harden them and shrink them to the point where they are taking care of their most valued assets. Fine. If we can do that, then we can better understand how we can achieve détente with one another in this extraordinarily amorphous environment where, you know, the good old day threat pyramid of a nation state and then organized crime and then gangs and individuals is now turned on its head. Because an individual can scare the nation state. The individual can work through a virtual gang to support organized crime to go against a nation state. All right, well, sorry, that's multivariate calculus. That's hard, right? So what we need to do as researchers is try to explain to people the threat profile in what we're testing, the value, get out of them the value of the asset we're trying to protect. It's not just my communications. My life is now in this thingy that I walk around with. And I think, you know, there is an upside to it. If we can do that, we can start to get better research dollars. That's my view, because I've seen it increase. By going to people, explaining to them the applied value of it, what it means to them, that it's not just abstract. And with that, I will take any questions you have. By the way, that's the Enigma machine from World War II. Hopefully, I will not be an enigma. So, any questions? I answered them all? Go ahead, fire away.
Do you think that the companies who market consumer electronics are in any way responsible for educating the public as to what the what people are really doing and what their products are actually doing with their information.
Everybody should be. Now, so let me put it to you this way. One of the big things between industry and government, right, is information sharing. Okay, everybody talks about information sharing, public-private partnerships, blah, 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 blah. What is the incentive for me as a .com to share anything with the United States government? Same thing, think about it from the business perspective of what does company X have as an incentive to explain to their customers what is going on with their information, whether it's, one of the big search engines or it's a hardware manufacturer or whatever, right? What is their value? Well, there has to be some incentive. There has to be a business incentive. The government can pay me to tell them stuff, okay? Which, if you read the press over the last few months, the government paid companies a lot of money for certain information that people are upset about. Last time I checked, I wasn't getting any money from the government in order for me to share my company information with them. All right, part two, they could regulate it. They could say, by law, you have to share this information with me. Well, the government's not going to regulate it. Now, one way they may indirectly regulate it is in requests for proposals and contracts that they sign saying you have to achieve a certain level of security, privacy, availability, reliability, survivability, and those things. But that would require the government to be able to define the box that all that fits in so you have evaluation criteria. Third is, it can be a quid pro quo. They can tell me stuff and I will tell them stuff. And we'll share with one another about threat profile, right? But that's hard to do because, one, I need to anonymize the information I give to them so when they do have a data breach, people don't know it's my company. On the other side, they have to anonymize it to some degree because it's classified. They don't want to give up the sources and methods. So it's a bit of a kabuki dance that we do with the government relative to what the attack profiles are, what the cycles are, and things like that. Now, one thing I will say is that were I the head of some company that made a device that I wanted to sell, and I had a better security profile in that device that raised the anonymity, privacy, availability, reliability, survivability, and security of it so that I can hand it over to you and say, my device has a higher level of surety than anybody else's, I would be touting that a lot. Now, I understand the moment I say that, everybody in the world is going to attack my device. But that would be one of the selling points I would have, either about the network itself or the device itself or, the crypto in it or whatever. It's like, startpage.com or DuckDuckGo, right? Those are web pages that say, we don't track you, we don't bubble you, and oh, by the way, startpage.com doesn't give up your IP address. And you actually go through a proxy. Automatically, you go through a proxy. So they're getting a lot more use after the summer of Snowden. So they're getting a lot more use because people are saying, hey, I don't like this. So there is a business story there from a company standpoint. I think they have an obligation. I think they have an obligation to tell. I think they have an obligation, but I wouldn't put it in terms of it's a stick, right? I would put it in terms of like any business discriminator. I do it better than anybody else. Don't just, try and give a value discussion as opposed to just, I'm cheaper than the next guy. Yeah, the next guy's cheaper than me, and oh, by the way, Here's how you get his information, how I get your information out of his device. People put the burn on everybody all the time in business. So if you can show advantage, if you can show real value, again, this is what's valuable to you as the customer, right? You're the buyer, I'm the seller. What do I have? Do I understand what you want? Okay, why isn't privacy security, why isn't system surety something that's sold? Any other questions? Sir.
So, in today's budget situation, and I'm thinking in terms of the
Sorry,
first half of your presentation,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, in modern times, as things are being modernized, do you believe that the surety of systems that used to be more sure, or whatever the correct term is going down as time goes on?
Well, yeah, everything loses edge, right? I mean, everything degrades.
Yeah, I guess my question is more, do you think that their surety level is going down as they become modernized, right?
As they become modernized. If you're talking about the stockpile itself, I would say the surety is going up because there are changes being made to make the devices safer, more reliable, and all that. That's my view. In terms of the infrastructure, I mean, this is not a slam on healthcare or any of that stuff. It's just look at what's happening with healthcare.gov. Every time they fix something, they find something else. Now, that's not unique to healthcare.gov. So as the infrastructure expands, and this is the point I make about the dirty environment. The dirty environment is the ever-changing environment, right? You stabilize an environment and it changes right away because somebody put something else on it, you get an update, all this. So I think there's a distinction between what we would consider modernizing the computational infrastructure, the data infrastructure, and modernizing a particular device that's in a stockpile. Because it unto itself is an isolated thing, and you can fix certain parts of it and you can modernize certain parts of it. The struggle you have with the infrastructure is the interconnection, right? It's all tied into all kinds of other stuff. And that, unfortunately, is tied into human nature and human frailty and wanting to double-click on attachments because they think to get a password to a porn site. You know, I mean, you can't overcome those kinds of things in human nature, so you have to design to map to that. Now, the point I would make is that as your point about dwindling budgets, right? So you have a dwindling budget. That's a dwindling budget for IT as well as stockpile, as well as personnel, as well as all kinds of other stuff. So as that financial base contracts, the infrastructure suffers because we have to try and spread it like peanut butter over an ever-increasing piece of bread. So I think part of the valuation discussion we should be having with people is what's really important? What's really valuable to you and why? So that we can focus the limited dollars on that piece that we really need to care about. And that gives us better focus as researchers and designers and builders and all that. And it's 1 o'clock. Any other questions?
One more question.
Anything?
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.